Welcome to this week's edition of Taiwan Outlook. I'm your host, Chi-Chen Lo. China is going to host this summer's Olympic Games in Beijing in August. Before that, we are going to see the so-called Olympic torch relay over the world. But at the same time, we'll be also watching the so-called human rights torch relay. So what's the purpose of having that kind of relay? In today's program, we are very delighted to invite two guests to share with us their views about the relay, especially the human rights in China. Our first guest is Dr. Clive Ansley. He's a renowned human rights lawyer. Dr. Ansley, welcome to our program.
Thank you.
And he's also a China watcher and China expert for more than 40 years. And our second guest is Mr. Erping Zhang. He's a spokesperson for Falun Gong. Mr. Zhang, welcome to our program.
Thank you.
So before we begin our conversation, let's take a look at the video clip about the human rights torch relay. So, Mr. Zhang, could you tell us first about the human rights torch relay? What's the purpose of having that kind of relay?
What happens is there are groups of individuals, including the practitioner of Falun Gong overseas, trying to highlight the human rights abuse in China. So individuals, including politicians, people of individual concerns, with concerns for the rights abuse, and NGOs and non-profit organizations. So they formed this coalition for investigating persecution of Falun Gong, try to highlight these concerns through the human rights torch relay, right in the eve of the Olympic Games. What happens is that they put out a condition that the game can take place, but they have a deadline to meet to end this persecution, including the harvesting the organs from the practitioner Falun Gong and other abuse in China. And the deadline was actually August 8th, 2007.
Yeah.
And until then, Beijing has to meet all these conditions. But apparently, Beijing ignored this appeal from all these groups and individuals. So then these people just go around the world to the major cities and do the human rights torture relay to, in a symbolic way to inform the international community about what's going on in China.
Dr. Ansley, you've been a China watcher for decades, and as we know that 7 years ago, when China hoped to win the bid to host the Olympic Games, they promised to improve the human rights situation in their country. Looking back, do you think China is improving in terms of human rights or deteriorating?
Well, I think there's no doubt at all that the situation in China is deteriorating. Looking at it from a different point of view, the government in Beijing kept its record absolutely clear, I think, in that I can't think of any other promises it's ever made that it lived up to either.
But what can we do about it? Because China is going to host the Olympic Games anyway, and the pressure is mounting, but China tends to ignore that kind of pressure.
Well, it's not really ignoring it, I have to say. I think that all the signs indicate that the Beijing government is becoming more and more worried every day about the negative publicity that's being generated. And my government in Canada was one which for many years held to this idea that the way to bring about human rights progress in China was to talk to the Beijing regime behind closed doors, to hold these human rights dialogues. And there were two problems with that. First is that it seemed to have no effect whatsoever on Beijing, and the point I'm really making is that this Beijing regime responds only to public embarrassment.
That's right.
They don't respond to any points that are made behind closed doors. The other problem with the dialogues, of course, is that it made our government unaccountable as well, because we Canadian citizens have no idea what our Prime Minister or other government leaders are saying behind closed doors. Most of the time, I think they were saying nothing.
But why do most countries dare not to or decide not to criticize China in public in terms of human rights?
Well, if you talk about the state actors, there's an economic interest involved. And China is part of the major supplier of the products and trade for in this day and age in globalization. But we also we have to say that there are some individual countries. For example, the Dutch government expressed concern about the Olympic Games. They think the human rights should be addressed, and that's precisely why we've been holding this human rights torture rally starting in Athens last year, and wherever we go, we've been reported by the press, and there are athletes involved, there are local politicians involved, to try to address these concerns, and so far I think has quite a positive impact. At least it's informing the public of what's going on in China.
A couple of weeks ago, movie director Steven Spielberg decided to pull away from the Olympic Games. Do you think that's a big boost to those human rights watchers in this event?
I think it is. I think it is a very big boost. I'm very sorry that he didn't do it a lot earlier, and I'm sorry that he didn't have a lot more to say about it. And I'm sorry that he related it only to the genocide that China is sponsoring in Darfur, rather than directly to the genocide that Beijing is carrying out in China.
But as you mentioned, that most people pay attention to China not because of human rights in China, but also about the human rights in Darfur. Why is that?
Well, I think that in many cases it's because people haven't been made aware of what's happening in China. They are aware, or many of them are aware of what's happening in Darfur, but there's a real irony in attacking China for indirectly sponsoring a genocide somewhere else when they've been carrying out one of the most atrocious genocides the world has ever seen in China, because even the Nazis weren't engaged in killing people on the operating table to steal their organs. This, as David Matus has said, was a new form of evil on this planet, but it has never been really given the publicity in outside of China that Darfur has until very recently. And I sat beside a very high-ranking judge in Canada very recently at a dinner, and she had made a number of trips to China. She was quite critical of the Beijing government and the human rights record there. But when I mentioned the fact that it extended now to killing tens of thousands of people in order to facilitate organ theft, she made a funny little gesture. She put her hand out. She said, well, as if to indicate that this was very much in doubt. She'd heard the claims, but she didn't really accept that. And I imitated her. I held my hand out and I said, no, there's none of this. This is real. And I asked her if she had read the report prepared by David Matus and David Kilgore. She said she had not. And I suggested she'd better do that first before she made any more funny gestures.
That's right. Falun Gong over the years has been trying to expose the true human rights situation in China to the world. And over the years, do you think that people are having more awareness about the situation now in China?
Well, when the persecution of Falun Gong started on July 22nd, 1999, most of the people around the world had no clue, what Falun Gong actually is. Besides, Beijing has used all the state propaganda machinery to defame Falun Gong, whenever they can, and also using all the economic, diplomatic channels to pressure the international community not to, voice any concern. Over the years, through the human rights torture relay and through different sort of efforts by the people in and out of China, and through human rights activists like Clive, the world is getting a little bit more informed about the atrocities and the suffering that people have gone through in the community.
Apparently, Falun Gong is not enough. We need more international efforts and cooperation. So when we come back, we'll talk about this international cooperation among governments, individual NGOs, and so on, and how we can do more to improve the human rights situation in China. Don't go away. We'll be right back after this.